In today's episode, we're talking about employee experience and the core principles of motivation. From Engagement, I'm David Millay, and this is Flip the Switch. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Flip the Switch, where we sit down with leaders in customer experience and employee experience, and we try to figure out what are the trends that they're paying attention to? What are the experiments that they're running? What are the principles that have helped propel their careers to success? And we take all those insights and we apply them to the world of sports and entertainment. Now, in today's episode, we are sitting down with Scott Rigby, a fellow Orlando guy. We actually found out as we were talking that he worked in the office above me for years when I worked for Disney at Disney Institute. And related, he works for a company and is the founder and CEO of a company called Immersyve and MotivationWorks. And what they do at Immersyve and MotivationWorks is they really help organizations understand the core principles behind employee motivation. Because if you can understand what really drives an employee to key behaviors, you can pull different levers to ultimately get the results that you're looking for. And so when we think about the basic principles behind motivation, we're going to talk about a theory that comes from the Immersyve team and Scott's team, and that is really the world's leading theory on motivation. I won't spoil it. We'll let Scott talk about it, but really, really great episode if you are trying to figure out how the heck do I connect better with my employees today? We've bumped up our salaries. People are still leaving. We're still having a hard time attracting employees because of this great resignation. Well, tune into this episode. Scott is really going to dial into the details of how you can better motivate your team by understanding what truly motivates us as humans. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with Scott Rigby. Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here.
I feel like we should have hit the record button like 10 minutes ago. So for everybody listening, all my former Disney people listening, Scott was actually in the 215. We worked in the same office building for years. We just found out he was one floor above me. So anyway, we should have hit the record button 5 minutes ago.
You were that guy in the elevator that spilled coffee on me that time, I think.
You know what? Highly likely, because
now I remember you.
Coffee is constantly in my hand, so I believe it. Well, Scott, talk to us a little bit about what you're doing right now with Immersyve and how you guys are working.
Yeah, my background is I'm a behavioral scientist, right? So I started out really as a nerd studying psychology and, ultimately was on a path to do clinical work and do applied work. And then, right around the time that I was coming out of that, there was this little thing called the internet that was being invented. I've just dated myself. But I was also a computer nerd, and I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. And I jumped ship and started to do kind of commercial applications, started to build websites. And I found myself starting a digital agency that was building marketing websites for companies and things. We grew to about 100 people. We were kind of caught up in that, old school internet, era during the 90s up until everything kind of crashed. I took some time after that and decided, well, what do I want to do next? And what I realized is I want to apply this behavioral science, and I want to apply it to these kind of commercial problems, to spaces of product design, to team motivation, to all these different things, because I didn't see a lot of that going on. And so we started Immersyve almost 20 years ago now. Wow. And we started to apply, in particular, this model called self-determination theory to all kinds of things. So a lot of entertainment, video games and entertainment spaces, television, networks. We started to kind of apply the behavioral science. And then in the last few years, we've started to then migrate over and start to apply it to employee engagement and to culture building, because it turns out, I know, a lot of the audience here is sports and sports venues. Self-determination theory is actually a big model that's also used in coaching and in sport, and to great benefit. And so that's really what we've been about. And it's super exciting and fulfilling work.
Yeah. I mean, let's get into it. You brought up self-determination theory. I think that's a great way to start. And for everybody listening, I mean, we're going to get deep here on employee experience and behavioral science behind it. So let's get into it. Let's nerd out self-determination theory. Talk to us about what that is.
Sure. So self-determination theory is essentially the leading scientific theory of well-being and fulfillment and motivation on the planet. And when I say that, I back that up by the fact that there's no model out there right now that gets more citations, more references, more, while we're on this podcast, there'll be 4 or 5 new scientific publications referencing the theory. 40,000 citations and references last year, like 100, 120 a day. And the reason that it's getting all of those citations is, number one, it's right. And it's right about something that I want to get into called basic psychological needs. But the real heart of the theory is it's identified in a way that's understandable, measurable, and actionable, what we all need fundamentally as human beings in order to feel fulfilled, feel like we can thrive, have greater engagement, have greater well-being. And we can even walk through, it's not like 27 needs or 42 needs, it's actually 3 basic psychological needs, and we can talk through those. But really what self-determination theory is, and one other thing I'll say is, when you say theory out in the world, people are like, oh, theory, I have theories. It's an opinion or thought. In the scientific world, it means the opposite. Theory is something that's been deeply proven. And so what's nice about self-determination theory is everything that we're going to talk about today, I got a stack of empirical studies this high backing it up, probably this high. Some probably, would fill up my whole office. Thousands of studies all over the world. So there's an incredible evidence behind it, which makes it something people can trust.
That makes a ton of sense. Let's get into it. I'm going to guess that paying people more is the best way to do it, right? That's the number one basic need that comes up. I'm kidding. I know that it's not that, but let's get into it.
You're setting me up.
I'm setting you up. I'm teeing you up.
Right. Well, listen, it sounds like a setup, but it is amazing how much people still fall back on this idea of rewards. And I would really like to unpack that, because it's the mistake that almost every organization makes, is if I want to motivate people, that I can do it by kind of giving them more rewards, and that's going to motivate them. What we know from self-determination theory is that is incorrect in the long term. And the reason that people keep doing that are for 2 reasons. One, it does work in the short term. If I dangle a $100 bill in front of you, I can get you to do a few things for that money, right? And so you kind of see it work in the short term. You're like, boom, this is what motivation is about. But the problem is that over time, it actually undermines the deeper motivation to engage. It actually doesn't help you to feel a sense of engagement in your job. I mean, think for a minute. I'll just give an example of this. What do we mean when we talk about engagement in our cultures? Well, everybody has a different definition, but we all kind of know it when we see it, right? And it's, I'm going to go the extra mile. I'm committed. It's
I'm
the
going to stay late. Yep.
I'm going to stay late, right? It's emotionally rich. It's the closest word we have to love in a work environment, right?
That's fair, yeah.
And so when you talk about that emotional engagement, what kind of emotional engagement like that has ever been purchased? Has ever been a transaction? Everybody just think about your own life. And you think about the relationships and the things you're most invested in, the things that you care the most about. A defining characteristic of those relationships is that they're not transactional, that you feel like somebody really cares about me, that I really believe in the cause and the purpose. If there's transactionality, and if somebody brought transactionality into that, what would it do? It would undermine it. It would cheapen it. You'd be insulted. You'd be offended. So even this idea in the workspace that we should be in transactions and money, that's the first thing that people are getting wrong as they're trying to tackle this issue of engagement. And even beyond that, I'm going to go one more step here, is that a more fundamental problem that organizations have is they've got it wrong about the locus of causality, that who motivates what. It's sort of like, how do I motivate you? How, as a manager, do I motivate my team? How, as a leader, do I motivate the organization? Okay. Yes, there needs to be leadership. There needs to be vision. We can get into all that. But the problem is that if you make yourself the actor in someone else's motivation, you're already wrong. The great thing about self-determination theory is that the 3 basic needs that we have, and I'll unpack them in a minute, that these basic needs motivate everybody intrinsically. Everybody wants to be motivated. They all have that engine. Our job is not to try to motivate them. Our job is to create the circumstances in which their motivation comes out itself. And when you do that, that's the whole ballgame. That's where you're going to get the love, right, for the organization, the engagement, the commitment. That's going to go far beyond the transactional elements.
So for everybody listening, you probably have like 5 different questions like I do. And I typed them down. I wrote them down. We're going to go back to them here. But let's jump into the 3 basic needs. So we keep talking about the 3 basic needs that drive this. What are those 3 basic needs? If it's not money, if it's not rewards, whether that's intrinsic, financial, however you want to say it, what are those 3 basic needs?
Let's go into them. I'm going to actually start by framing them in terms of what they look like in terms of the experience. That there's 3 core experiences, right? And then I'll tag them into the science and the needs. The first experience, kind of the step 1, is people need to have that sense of, I believe. I believe in the work that I'm doing. Yes, that means I believe in the mission. I believe you hear organizations talk about purpose and vision and mission. At a global level, that's important. But I also need to believe in when I have to go and like fill the butter in the popcorn machine in the lobby. I have to believe in the day-to-day tasks that I'm doing. And believing then means that I feel like I'm engaging in this, even if it's unpleasant, because I see its purpose, I see its meaning, I see its connection to kind of a greater whole, and I endorse the actions that I'm doing. Underneath that I believe experience is the basic psychological need we have for autonomy. We all share a basic need for autonomy. We want to be the authors of our lives. We want to endorse what we're doing when something's happening. We want to feel that there's a good rationale for it, right? And autonomy a lot of times is misunderstood to be freedom and independence. Oh, I know autonomy is I need to give my people freedom and independence. But this is why the science is so great, because we know from the science that's not what autonomy is. Autonomy isn't independence. It's not freedom. It's this sense of endorsement. It's this sense of I believe in, if you're involved in a structure or you're doing something that you don't really have a choice about, that you are like, I understand this. I still endorse it. I don't have a choice. This is something I have to get done. I've been told to do it from high, or there's a policy or procedure, but I see the reason why and I'm on board. Versus I'm feeling really controlled and forced and pushed around, right? It's that feeling of control that's the opposite of autonomy. And so when you reframe it, autonomy as endorsement rather than freedom or independence, guess what? You've opened up, if you're a leader at an organization, you've opened up a whole new ball game, because now you don't have to worry about, I got to give people freedom. And now you're in this tension, like, how do I give people freedom when I got to get stuff done? Instead, it becomes, let's make sure that we're giving people rationales for everything that they're doing, that we're taking the time to listen, right, to when they disagree or don't understand with why something's being done the way it's done. Because when we go into that process of giving them a rationale, we win them over to endorsement, and they feel autonomous even within the structure. And so this is just a couple of examples of that key need. We can pause there. I can get to the next 2. What do you want to do?
Let's go to the next ones, and then because I'm making notes, we're going to come back into each one of these and dive deeper.
So
I got too many questions, and I don't want to interrupt you.
No problem. That's the experience of I believe tied to that basic psychological need for autonomy. One sidebar: when I talk about basic psychological needs, I mean it in kind of an absolute sense. In the same way that you can talk about basic physical needs, hunger, thirst, needs that are true for all of us, no matter where we live, no matter what demographic segment we're in. We all share these needs for hunger, thirst. Every need that I'm going over now, we all share as human beings. And that's been demonstrated. We don't have time to go into all the nerd out science, but that all exists, right? And so what that means is these are very powerful things, because it doesn't matter the age of your workforce or how many millennials are working for you, or are you geographically diverse? If you focus on these needs, it's going to have benefit to the organization. So we talked about autonomy. The next is I belong, the experience of I belong. And what's underneath this is the basic psychological need for relatedness. Relatedness is that sense that I feel like I matter to you and you matter to me. We matter to each other, right? That I feel like I'm contributing something to the effort, to the organization, that I'm respected, that my voice is valued. When we talk about diversity and equity and inclusion, if you think about this idea of supporting people's autonomy, giving them rationales and respecting them, and this idea of I belong, you can see how just by supporting those things, you're going to explicitly not just drive engagement, but drive more of a greater sense of inclusion in the culture, because you're addressing these basic psychological needs that are really at the heart of a lot of these issues. So we're doing a lot more work kind of researching that and showing those connections between the basic needs and, these experiences, particularly of inclusion. So that's the basic psychological need that we all have for relatedness. And then the third is the experience of I succeed. And that has to do with our basic psychological need for, sometimes we call it competence in the science, in the nerdy literature. But competence kind of sounds weak. People like, I don't want to be competent, particularly in sports. It's like, I want to be masterful. So we also call it mastery. Right?
Yep.
Like I want to be efficacious in what I'm doing, right? Everybody comes to work and they want to crush it. And whatever they're doing, they want to do a great job. And they want to do that moment to moment in their jobs, but they also want to have a sense of growth, right? My skills are growing. I'm becoming more skillful. As my skills grow, there's more opportunities for me to learn new skills. It's not just about I'm getting a promotion. Really what promotions are about having opportunities to learn and grow new skills. And also it becomes informational feedback that the organization is valuing you and that you've actually demonstrated that kind of mastery. So you've got those three experiences, right? You've got I believe, I belong, I succeed. And the reason I know those are right is underneath those things are the basic need for autonomy, relatedness, and mastery. And that's it. Like it's taken 5-10 minutes. If you focus on those things, if you laser focus on those things and train your leaders and managers to support and facilitate those things, there is not one people metric in your culture that is not going to improve.
We could do a whole episode on each one of these experiences of I believe, I belong, I succeed. So let's just do a little bit unpacking underneath each one. We spent a lot of time talking about I believe. I mean, as I heard you say it, kind of part of that is ownership. And one thing we hit on each one of these things is, I think for many of our listeners, they may have heard of this framework before in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's not these exact words, but what I want to focus on is, especially from your experience working with clients, where do people trip on these things? What are the obstacles in the dark that people don't see until they're really going after it and they triple? So let's talk about that for I believe. Where do people get caught up when they're trying to connect purpose to individual tasks, and what's the obstacles?
Yeah. So a couple of things. The first thing is something we've already talked about, which is you got to get out of that kind of colloquial mindset of it's independence, right? Oh, I'm just going to give people a lot of choice. I'm going to tell a very brief story about it, but it really illustrates this, which is early on in this work, there was a hospital system. There was a paper published about how autonomy was important in making decisions about one's, medical health, et cetera. And there's a hospital system. It's like, this is great. We're going to embrace this. And so they ran a little study. We weren't involved in it. And they came back and they were, a little bit upset. It's like, this autonomy thing doesn't work. People got more upset and everything else. Like, okay, well, what did you do? What they did was they actually had surgeons go into the room to, the patient who's sitting there kind of in pre-op, said, hey, we're about to have your surgery, and, take out a chart and be like, okay, now I can make an incision this way, or I can make an incision this way, or because the idea was, well, autonomy is choice, right? But right, sounds terrifying, right?
For sure.
Because autonomy isn't choice. Autonomy is endorsement. And when we go to a doctor, or I think in the sports setting, a coach or whatever else, a lot of times we very willingly endorse their expertise. We willingly turn over our independence, right, to a process or to a procedure or to a leader. And we feel very autonomous in doing that. As a matter of fact, when they do something like what I just described, it can be very, unsettling because we don't have the expertise, et cetera, to do it. So this is one of the ways in which we see, and that's kind of an extreme,
for sure,
humorous and a little creepy example. But this is one of the common mistakes that's made. Another mistake that's made is that people say, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to sit there and kind of give rationales and, do these certain things. I just need something done. There's time to go out and kind of do it. And in this case, they learn the hard way that if you don't take the time, first of all, they overestimate how much time it's going to take. If there's a task that needs to get done, you can actually take 30 seconds and take some time to describe, for example, listen, we have a change in this policy and procedure. Let me tell you first why that's taking place. And I first didn't understand it myself. And so I made sure I asked, my managers about it. And that's, by the way, another thing that's a great example is if all managers are trained to make sure they're fully endorsing what's happening, then they don't just become somebody going, well, guess what? The head office says X. So here we go, folks. Right. And then you convey that can take an extra 30 seconds or a minute. You're going to get better performance. You're going to get more alignment. You're going to get people on board. It's going to save you a ton of time and energy that you would have spent herding cats otherwise by just kind of like dictating the message down, right? So those are a couple of mistakes that we often see there.
I mean, I think one of the other areas on the I believe aspect where I see people getting caught up is they go and create this bigger purpose statement, if you will, or some bigger mission, but they're not connecting the day-to-day tasks. And I'll give a prime example. Obviously, I mean, for our listeners, they know this. We do a lot of work in college athletics, and I think a lot of times internally, the messaging is it's all about the student athletes. It's all about the student athletes because truly, historically, that is how it has been. But if you're sending out digital marketing emails and you never interact with the student athlete, how are you connecting that individual's day-to-day purpose with the larger organization? If you're not doing that on a roll-to-roll basis, you're going to have fall off. Doesn't matter how much time or what creative work session you did to create that purpose statement. If managers aren't taking the time to connect day-to-day tasks to that, you're going to have people that are misaligned and they're not going to get it. And they're going to say, another example of how leadership just doesn't get it.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think a lot of times leaders in particular live in an aspirational state. Like we aspire to employee engagement, we aspire to the mission. And to a certain extent, that's a job of leadership. You do need to create a mission. You need to create these things. But if there's not that connection and you don't have a method to kind of connect that in, then you're going to feel people not endorsing things. And more importantly, if we jump kind of a little bit to the third need of mastery and efficacy and those things, they're not going to feel as effective, right? And being able to like, what's that connection? And even the second need, you're not going to feel like you belong, like I matter. If there's this mission here and there's what I'm doing day to day here, and there's this fog of war in the middle, then how am I going to feel like I matter unless there's that communication of that change? So you can see how that problem in particular hits across deficits across all three.
Let's talk a little bit about I belong. Where are some of the obstacles in the dark that people trip over when they're aspiring to make it so that their employees feel like they belong?
Yeah. Well, one of the things about I belong is that this is kind of that kind of interpersonal, climate nature of things. And so where a lot of people break down is they don't do the easy stuff. So managers spend a lot of time in the tactical details of what needs to be done rather than taking a moment to even just ask people about how they're doing. But doing it in a very genuine way, right? How are you doing? What's happening? Not suggesting that you need to, have kind of boundary issues and like, get in, break down any walls. It's really just checking in with people and seeing how they're doing and how they're feeling. And that's something that has a very low cost, but it's amazing how little we actually see that going on, right?
No
question. Then when you see things happening on at a team or a meeting level, you often see a lot of competition for the best idea wins. And people are kind of throwing that out rather than managers kind of setting a tone where we're all better by the voices of every person in this room. And so a lot of the training we do is around how do you run a meeting so that there is that sense of inclusion in the meeting, right? How do you manage because there's always the people in the meeting that you don't have to worry about them having something to say, right? They always have something to say. So how do you kind of manage them not sucking all the oxygen out of the room while still supporting them, while modeling, turning to those people who you also want to hear from and have a good idea, and having them kind of talk and speak up in that meeting and contribute and pointing out those contributions and really modeling that sense. And so I think we see this a lot also, is that you see a lot of dominant voices rise. The other dynamic we often see is whoever is perceived as the most important person in the room is the one whose ideas are listened to. Oftentimes that's whoever is the highest formal title, but sometimes there's kind of an informal structure as well, right?
Yep.
And so everybody kind of waits to hear. And as a manager, you have to do training to realize that your people are going to feel marginalized, and they're not going to feel they matter and belong unless you can be mindful of those dynamics and kind of work to balance them.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, when I think of I belong and what you just said, I mean, are you familiar with how like the Amazon structure of running meetings? You familiar with that?
Yeah, yeah, we've done some work with Amazon. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah. So we had John Rossman on. Do you know John Rossman? Do you know that name?
I don't know John now.
Great author. Great. One of my favorite books, 50 and a half ideas to basically become a digital leader. It's all Amazon best practices. But this was one of the things that they highlighted, especially in meetings, of like taking away that PowerPoint so that people can just dominate with that loud
Hmm.
voice, and structuring it where people are reading notes ahead of time, and you're coming in with the way that you run your structures and processes. You can do certain things to make sure people feel like they actually really belong.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great. Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
uh,
That's called, what's the name of the book again? Give it a plug in. 50 and a
I
half.
think it's called 50 and a half ideas to become a digital leader. It's all about the
Great.
way Amazon thinks. But I think one more thing on the I belong, and this is just, I'm reminded by, it's a project we're working on right now with one of our clients, where working on making sure that managers are plugged in with their employees to make sure that they are feeling connected, they are belonging. And so it's
Yes.
as simple as setting up a once a month, one-on-one 30-minute session where we're not talking about work. We're just talking about how you doing?
Yeah.
How's work-life balance going? How are your relationships in the office? Whatnot? And you're going to get a way better. That's something we used to do at Disney all the time.
Hmm.
And you just get way better engagement when you're able to tap into that.
Yeah, people, I think two things about that. One, people just want to feel, I'm just go back to a point I made earlier. They want relationships to not be transactional. And if you can very authentically make this about them, and that we care, I care as your manager, we care about you as a person, that just goes a tremendous way to giving that sense of I belong. I'll say something else. So it's like we find a lot of managers, if you say to them, well, you need to meet weekly with your people so that, because, there's lots of engagement measures out there that I could go on a rant about that I hate, because they measure an end state, they measure an outcome, and then they don't really. It's not anything you can really take action on, and they don't really tell you why that's important or what you can do with it. One of them is do you have a weekly meeting with your manager? That's on a very popular engagement measure out there.
Yeah.
And so what a lot of companies will do is then, whatever gets measured gets optimized. So everybody needs to have a weekly meeting with their people. Okay, well, what do you do in that meeting?
Right.
What's important? It's not the meeting itself that's important. And the reason that correlates with outcome is that managers that are really caring about their people are meeting more frequently with their people. But that doesn't mean if you meet with them, you're going to be a caring manager. It's really crazy stuff. But the thing about the three needs model is now I also have something to do in that meeting. I have a
Mm.
framework that isn't just about, checking in, which is great, but it's also about, you can then say, all right, I need to check in on these key experiences. I belong, I succeed. I believe. I need to check in on how do they feel supported by me in these basic needs. And if you understand that model, you can now have a conversation and check in specifically on these critical needs. And guess what? That deepens belonging even further than just kind of saying, how was your weekend? It
For
actually is
sure.
amazing.
I love that. It's a great strategy for anybody listening that you can take away and start implementing tomorrow, at least with your own
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
Um, well, let's dive a little bit deeper into obstacles in the dark around I succeed. What do
Mhm.
people need to be aware of so they don't trip over it when they're really trying to pursue this in their organization?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing with I Succeed, this is hopefully what all managers, have some competence doing to even make it to the role of a manager, right? You need to make sure that there's what we often call an optimal challenge in whatever the person's undertaking, um, in terms of their day-to-day tasks and their skills and their abilities. And so a lot of that is just, moving that slider behind what's the responsibility and skills that gets them to the point where, 90% of the time they feel like they're just coming in and successfully crushing it. Why do I say 90? Because they also are going to want to have some challenges, some things that are making them a little nervous, a little scared, but they feel like they can still do it, right? They can still overcome that challenge. They have you as their manager supporting them. They want that stretch goal because that moves them into that direction of growth, right? So it's not just about doing the same thing over and over again and doing it really well, but it's about what am I growing into? What are the new skills that I'm developing with all the people that are my direct reports? What I find, I mean, this is our model, right? And even I find that it's super easy when you're caught up. We're all so busy. We've got clients, we've got projects, and you've got a good team, hopefully, and they're good because you can rely on them to knock out the work that you've already domesticated, right, in your work life. And it would be easy to just rely on just letting them do that as 100% of their time because they're crushing it, and we're getting projects done, and can't we all just be happy? But there needs to be a piece that's about their skill development, or else they're not going to feel that satisfaction of mastery and growth. And too often, this is another, to your metaphor, tripping in the dark, I think we conflate what's your promotion path, what's your, what's you're going to go from assistant manager to director, whatever it might be. You're going to get a salary bump. If there's not skill development that goes along with that, that's meaningful to that person, then promotions alone are not going to satisfy that need. They're still going to disengage. And ultimately, it's going to be one of the factors that leads them to churn out.
I mean, on that note, totally agree. I've got one of my buddies right now who's one of my childhood best friends, and he's been in this role that he's in right now, pretty high up in a big company, and he's been there for the last, I don't know, 5 years, let's call it. And he just recently got tasked with handling it's an entertainment company, all their NFT initiatives. And he's like, honestly, this is the most energized I've ever been. I'm not getting paid a cent more. He's like, but I feel like I'm in school just constantly learning these new skills. And he's like, I'm just so much more energized about my job purely from the fact that I'm getting mastery. I'm learning a new skill. There's
Right.
some development there.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. And these things are really, I mean, yeah, sure. People want to have, compensation is important, and feeling that they're being fair, and they're feeling that they're accelerating that. But to feed that, because I want to come back to this issue of rewards, one of the things about those promotions and those salary raises, a lot of that is, what is that signaling to the employee? And when it's informational feedback on their skill growth and their contribution to the organization and et cetera, then that's actually affirming of their needs, that those reward structures are things that are actually can work in tandem, right, with their need fulfillment. When instead it's something that feels like it's dangled out there as a reason for doing something, that's where it becomes implicitly problematic. Because if you're like, hey, do this for the money, do this for the reward, then you're kind of communicating that there really isn't another good reason for doing this thing. We actually see this in our work in video games. We've done a lot of work with the video game industry. And, what we kind of have demonstrated for them is that you don't want to undermine the implicit, creative genius, the fun of the game that you've created by creating rewards that aren't meaningful and don't feed back into that need fulfillment, because otherwise you're going to undermine that implicit enjoyment. And ultimately that will lead people to churn out and disengage more quickly. And that's true, not just in that context, but work context and really everywhere.
I love it. And I know we could do a whole episode on just rewards. I mean, feel free to infuse that here, but we got to hit on something here. We got about 15 minutes left or so.
Yeah.
You mentioned locus of causality, and that is something I feel like deserves some time, because I think it's going to be a shift in the way a lot of people see their roles as leaders within an organization. So I'm gonna throw out a quote that I heard you share, and maybe we can unpack it here. The fundamental shift is it is not our job to reach out and engage people. It's our job to understand that engagement is their decision. We need to create the experiences and the circumstances that are most likely to engage and stay engaged, and not try to be the active agent in engagement.
Yep.
Where do we go from here? This is a mindset shift for a lot of listeners, where they view
it
their
really
role
is
differently.
Let me start with a couple of things. I'm imagining that as people hear that, there's a little bit of defensiveness, and it's totally natural. I have defensiveness when I hear it as a manager and as a leader, because you know what? Managers, leaders, we want to do things. And we have a full heart. We have a heart full of passion for what we do. And I believe, our kind of mission statement at our company is we want to work to benefit human well-being and happiness. We're very optimistic about everyone and about their intrinsic nature. So I bet managers and leaders like, I want to help people. I want to help my people succeed. I want to help the organization succeed. Okay. With all that as a backdrop, this is not saying that you should sit back and there aren't things for you to do. When I say you shouldn't be the active, you're not the actor in motivation and engagement. It's just you need to shift your thinking about what is your job, right, as a leader and a manager. And the first thing is that there's an incredible untapped energy that exists in every single member of your team that we've talked about where that comes from. It comes from these basic psychological needs and the fact that these are an internal fusion engine of motivation that is happening. If, as a manager and a leader, you make your actions about facilitating, right, need fulfillment, the experiences of I believe and I belong and I succeed, you will see engagement emerge. Right? It's an emergent thing. Engagement is emergent. All the things that we really care about, a sense of inclusion, a sense of commitment, a sense of vitality and energy and engagement. These are not things we can put our hands on like a knob and turn them. We need to create the conditions for them to spontaneously emerge from each individual. And that's the different way to think about it. But it's not that we aren't active in that process. We simply shift to we're facilitators rather than causing or controlling.
What are some of the best examples or stories that you can give, whether it be from clients or organizations that you've studied who have done this and seen their role in this light and done it really well on the execution side?
Yeah. So one of the things I'll say is I'll anonymize this story a little bit, but one of the ways in which organizations get tripped up by this is that if you're going to create an environment and facilitate, a lot of times that feels like you need to have some courage to let go of control, and you need to be willing to hear whatever it is that people out of their place of self-determination want to say. So what happens is when something is not going well in the culture or on the team, that you need to sit with that and you need to allow that to emerge. And so we've done things where we've measured the culture and you'll see particularly bad scores. Maybe it's bad scores on one in particular organization recently, horrible scores on compensation satisfaction and compensation fairness and other things. And the approach of the organization, and these leaders are awesome, but the approach is, well, we need to we'll figure that out, but let's not put that in the major reporting, or let's not talk about that in the big town hall meeting. Let's, and there was a desire to take control, explain it away, right? Because if you gave voice to this, there's a fear that employees are going to that's going to pour gasoline on a fire. It's going to be pitchforks and torches on the castle. And that isn't what happens. If instead you kind of sit in that and allow those voices to be heard, and you really authentically want to hear them, you don't even have to offer the solutions right away. What happens is it takes the temperature down and people immediately start to feel better about those issues and feel more like their autonomy and their relatedness have been fulfilled in that moment, just in that process, right? And so this is particularly difficult. This is just one example of how it's particularly difficult to sometimes implement this, because facilitation sometimes means not putting your hand on something and wanting to control it. It means first stopping, listening, being present, being mindful. And all of those are skills that are trainable, but it's just a different mindset than most managers and leaders have.
Yeah, it totally is. When we think about some of the other things that you've seen around this, I mean, I think about how the pandemic has changed employee motivation, the things that motivate them. Obviously, those three basic needs still stay the same, but the employee experience and expectations that they have when they come into the workplace have changed a little bit. So how has this shift to kind of the remote work, hybrid, pandemic, how has that impacted what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. The first thing that we've had to deal with is that a lot of managers and leaders make that mistake of, independence equals autonomy. And so they're like, well, everybody has wasn't my choice, but the pandemic gave everybody all this freedom to work from home, so autonomy must be taken care of, right? Actually, it's not true. The opposite has happened, which is because the normal kind of schema and structures of coming to the office and the normal patterns, spoken and otherwise, of the culture, that people are more fragmented. Suddenly structure has gone away. And that makes it even more important that there be time taken to explain rationale, set up new structures so that people can feel what we talked about earlier, that sense of connection between their job and the mission, or between the job
Mhm.
and the kind of proximate goal. And so there's actually more need to actually create structure and conversation because people are so remote. And that actually improves their autonomy. It doesn't restrict their autonomy. So, it's one of those kind of, when you think about it, it's paradoxical a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that the other thing that has been interesting when we've talked to people about remote work is that there's been a little bit of, I don't want to say panic, but um, managers and leaders were used to having everybody in front of them, and so they could turn the knobs of control more readily. And so now that everybody's remote, it's like, well, what are they doing? How can we make sure we're like surveilling the process and what's going on? And when you take a need support or a facilitation approach, it actually lends itself well to this kind of remote setting, right?
Yeah.
Because you can come into this setting and like, it's okay that you're at a distance. I just need to make sure that those needs are met. And again, if you focus in on each of those three needs and give them equal weight, then it's amazing how uh, the environment will take lots of different forms depending on what business you're in and what your culture is. This, I think, is one other aside I want to make is one of the things that I find working with clients is powerful about this is I'm not telling you to have a meeting every Thursday at 4 o'clock in which
Right.
you do
Right.
X, Y, and Z, right? I'm saying, look, understand these basic notes like these, and then you can come up with whatever song works for your organization. But these are the strings you got to hit, right? This is your C chord. You got to hit these three key experiences, and if you do that, there's you can use a lot of creativity into how you build it.
It's interesting too for people that have never heard this term. I think of the most extreme version of what we're talking about. And to a certain extent, that's how we kind of run here at Engagement, which is a row workplace, right? Results only workplace environment where it's
Hmm.
like our employees have total choice over how they do their work and when they do their work and where they do their work. At the end of the day, as long as the work is getting done, that's what we care
Yeah,
about. And
yeah,
I think that's kind of the most extreme version of that. But to do that, I mean, you've got to be providing opportunities for that employee to upskill. If they don't feel like they belong, they're not going to get the work done.
yeah.
And if they're not driving towards a bigger purpose, they're going to check out. And so I think from the most extreme version, if people want to go research that concept, go for it. But I think it's pretty related here.
Yeah, one of the things that this can help you do is it puts some guardrails on doing bad implementations of that row. Because like one of the things about row is it might be like, all right, it's all about just going out and getting the work done, rather than kind of, the excellence that comes when, well, we don't just kind of all put our heads down and go like this, because we get better results when we have that I belong, that inclusion,
No doubt.
right? And so so when you keep that I belong in the mix, but you can tie that in to the results oriented, workplace. And that actually it's that connection that, is the heart of inclusion, right? Inclusion isn't I'm going to put up with everybody. Inclusion is, this is awesome to have all these voices. I want to hear things that I don't understand. I don't even understand your perspective, but I believe that this is going to, make us all more successful in this work, which again feeds into that I succeed. And that's the other thing I'll say about these three needs is they're all discrete, but they're also interrelated. It becomes a virtuous cycle. As you support one, it becomes easier to support others. Supporting others will support this one, and so focusing on all three becomes really powerful.
Mm. All right. So as we start to wind down here, something you mentioned earlier, I want to key in on. What are some opinions, like let's call them expert opinions, that you hear in your area of expertise that you just like flat out disagree with, and why?
Well, I have to come back. I have to come back to the reward structures.
Let's hit
as
it.
as absolutely the first one. So, there's a lot of things out there that are really about that behavioral approach. And it's been in corporate culture for 50 years. And B.F. Skinner, back during the psychology days, of like, hey, we can get people, if you get a rat to hit a bar and get a pellet, that they'll keep hitting the bar faster. And then this became part of like during the industrial era, assembly line stuff. So it's baked in. And the reason that it stays baked in is because we can see it work in the short term, and it lets managers and leaders kind of keep control. And the problem is that nobody's looking long term. So I'll get into these debates with behaviorists, and they're only able to talk about these kind of short term, impacts that are going on. And every research study, and then I'll do a research study. We did something recently where there was a reward structure, and some people brought us in to say, like, we're interested in this intrinsic structure. And a lot of the reward people are kind of predicting the rewards are going to win. And we'll do the research and actually show that rewards actually have a very weak a weak positive impact, very weak. Sometimes it's actually null impact on people's engagement. And as you get further out in time, it actually drops to zero very quickly. The intrinsic factors that we have, the order of magnitude more powerful on engagement and on sustained engagement over time. And we see this kind of time and again. So this is one of the things that we run into. The other thing we run into is a variant of that, which is, well, I think intrinsic is great. Who's not going to like what I'm talking about, right? We're talking about needs and supporting people. It's like, yeah, it's great. We'll do that. But, we need rewards too. Like rewards will kind of get the engine going. Give them the rewards. And then, we can layer in. Let's just do everything. It's additive. That's the other big mistake. Sounds good, but it's actually not true when you look at the research. And I've mentioned this a couple of times. The problem is you're sending these multiple signals, and so rewards can kind of undermine, because you're basically saying, well, the activity must not be good enough, so we're going to add all these rewards on top. But there's a second thing. When I offer you a reward to do something, you can see this with kids, you can see it with dogs, you can see it with adults. You're being manipulated. It might be a nice manipulation. You get the $100 bill, get the most, but you're being manipulated. Well, what is manipulation? Manipulation is control. And let's see if we've been paying attention. What does control directly run? Which need does control directly run against the grain of? Autonomy, right? And so when you have those dynamics at play, you're undermining this very basic psychological need. And we're all very, very sensitive to that. We know when it's happening immediately. And so that's the other reason that there's this backfire. But on the surface, I run into this almost everywhere.
So even, this is going to be, I want to go into it just a little bit, man. Are you good if we go over just a little bit longer?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
yeah, sure.
Cool. All right. So when we think about recognition, one thing that we definitely do here at Engagement is like, we'll implement a recognition program. And this is something that we used at Disney constantly. It was like almost like a kudos card, right? Like,
yep.
Hey, I saw somebody doing something great that was not a part of their jobs or responsibilities, whether that's picking up trash or, walking a guest to their seat when they're not an usher, right? One of those things. Hey, I can go out and say thank you, and I give them a card. Do we count recognition in that bucket? Talk to me how we should revise the way we're.
No, I'm so glad that you're bringing this up. A lot of times what happens after I have these debates about rewards is then I get tagged as like I'm the anti-reward guy. Like I think reward, it's like it's a black and white world. I actually think that things, particularly recognition, rewards, there's a place for them. I love rewards. There's a way that you can give rewards that, as I mentioned a couple times, it provides informational feedback to somebody that actually is fulfilling of their needs. So recognition can be, a real, a testimony to their mastery, to the sense that they belong, to give them feedback on things that can help them grow their skills. So rewards, feedback, recognition, they can all do those things. And so I think that they're immensely valuable. And I think the systems to do that can be immensely, can contribute a lot to engagement and to building a good culture. The problem is that I've seen good systems walk into a room, and I've seen bad systems walk into a room. I've seen good systems walk into a room and then be used in a bad way. The problem is that there's not enough discernment about when a system is good or bad, right? Every system that lets you kind of give tokens or rewards or badges or high fives or kudos is like, oh, more is better, right? It becomes a transaction. As soon as it becomes a transaction, then people start gaming the system and it starts losing its power. Somebody's like, oh, Bob got 5 kudos, I only got 3 kudos, or let's kind of run up, or you feel an obligation. It's like, oh, I guess I got to get back to my desk and kudo that. because everybody else is going to. Like I've seen these kinds of things happen, and suddenly it's no longer has that connection to that need fulfillment. And so the good news is that you can measure how people are perceiving these systems. So what I would encourage people is, as you're thinking about your recognition systems or your total reward systems, put them to the test. How are they perceived as supportive or facilitating of need fulfillment versus not, versus being transactional? And you can be tracking those things and then making adjustments as you go along. That's one thing we haven't talked about a lot is everything I've talked about is the science. You can quantifiably measure how these needs are being fulfilled, how people are perceiving environments or products or policies as being supporting or thwarting of those needs, and use that as input to build your culture.
Yeah. And I think just one more, my 2 cents to add on to it too is, and what you're hitting on it is, this is a constant evolution. You constantly got to be testing, measuring, adjusting, hypothesizing, testing, measuring, right? And it's a constant change because the workforce is changing constantly. The people that you work with change. The implementation of that process, now that it's got different people running it, at one point in time, it made sense. Now it doesn't make sense anymore because the tasks have changed. You constantly got to be tweaking. This is not an implement one time. And
it's not set it and forget it.
You got to constantly be working on it.
Yeah.
Well, Scott, are there any other, let's say you got a billboard to leave our listeners with. You can fit it on the billboard. One final piece of advice. What are you giving to our listeners here?
A piece of advice that would fit on a billboard. I'm going to paraphrase. I can't take full credit for this, but the source of all true happiness is focusing on others. And there's an analog to that, which is the source of most of our suffering is when we're too focused on ourselves. That's one. That's one that I think, I really take to heart, and it's easy for managers and leaders to quite rightly get caught up a lot in the worries and dynamics and everything, and kind of putting themselves at the center of that. And a lot of that suffering is relieved just by shifting that focus. It also moves you more to that orientation of facilitation versus control that we've been talking about.
Makes a ton of sense. Scott, where can people find you, follow along your journey, continue to hear your thoughts going forward? Where can people, or just reach out to you with any questions?
Well, I would say they can reach me at, I would say if they're interested in any of the tools and stuff that we offer for doing the things we've been talking about, go to MotivationWorks.com. You can email me at scott@motivationworks.com. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I think my Twitter is, I should use Twitter more. CS Rigby on Twitter. So I think all those places, but again, or if you're interested in more of the research, I would say the best thing to do is email me or head over to motivationworks.com, and there's a lot there.
And we'll put those links in the show note for anybody listening, so you can easily get a hold of them. Dr. Scott Rigby, this has been a pleasure having you on the show. Look forward to it.
Great.
Next time I'm in Orlando, we got to hit up Town Tavern in celebration and grab a drink.
Absolutely, man. Need a beer and some fried clams.
Oh,
I might walk down now. I'm right down. Just saying it. I think I might go. I don't mean to make you jealous.
I'm jealous. I'm if you're listening to this and not watching on YouTube, I'm wearing like a hoodie and a jacket, and it's not Florida weather where I am here in Cincinnati. But everybody, thanks for tuning in. Dr. Scott, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, man.
Hey guys, before you head out, just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to the show. If you enjoyed it, head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That helps more of your peers find the show as they search for ways to get better in their own roles. But this podcast is just a small part of what we do at Engagement. In our normal day in the office, we're crazy focused on helping athletic departments and sports and entertainment companies generate more revenue by becoming more customer-centric. To see how we might be able to help your organization, visit engagementpartners.com to learn more. Download a free guide, check out our blogs and case studies, or schedule a call with us if you want to see how we can help with your particular objectives. Our goal is to help you create deeper connections with fans and generate more revenue. So when you're with us, hopefully you find a nugget or two that helps your cause.